Welcome to another episode of Management Muse. I'm your host, Cindy Baldi, and this is my husband and co-host, Jeffrey Tumlin.
Yellow! Welcome to the podcast where we try to inspire better work performance. Thanks for listening.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today on Management Muse. I'm your host, Cindy Baldi, and my co-host, Jeffrey Tumlin.
Yellow!
And today we are going to talk about why the barista may be your most important friend.
There you go.
And so we're going to talk about weak ties.
Which is the academic term for people you barely know, acquaintances.
Versus strong ties, which are, I think, fairly intuitive, but those are your deep relationships. The people that
in your core.
Yeah. And we tend to really give most value and weight, I think, unless you're in academia, and then there's research. We tend to give more weight to the strong ties. And I think in general, people maybe don't see how the impact of weak ties actually can enhance their life.
Yeah. In focusing on the people we're closest to, which is obviously very important, we tend to overlook people who aren't as close to us who can offer wildly important functions, fulfill wildly important roles.
Your strong ties can't do everything.
That's right. Yeah, that's a good way of saying it.
So it's necessary, but not sufficient.
Yeah.
So I'm going to start with a story.
All right, lay it on me.
I'm going to start with your story.
Oh.
About your first book.
Okay. All right, I think I know what you're going to say, but go ahead.
Okay. So when Geoff first wrote his first book, which was Stop Talking, he had written the whole book, and we didn't.
True story.
We didn't know anybody who had written a book. Well, I mean, we knew academics who'd written a book, but those books go through like a somewhat different channel. They still go through similar publishers, but those publishers are focused on academic writing. And this was a popular press book. And so didn't really have any real ways to get in. But a few months before he'd finished the book and started shopping for an agent.
Yeah, sure. Needed an agent.
Somebody on LinkedIn had reached out to him for help.
Yeah, needed a favor. Somebody I barely knew.
Well, somebody who found you through her friend network. You weren't even directly connected at the time. It had no idea that this person was going to play a role in something in future. And so just Geoff being Geoff, tried to help.
Yeah.
And I think you were successful. You were successful in making the connection for her that she needed to get a job.
She needed to, wasn't difficult.
Right. But you did it.
Huh.
And you basically did it for somebody who is a stranger, but you shared a connection.
Yeah.
And then, I don't know, it was like 2 months later.
Yep.
We were starting to search through LinkedIn. LinkedIn has a really good way of helping you see out ties that are beyond just somebody's core network. So, you start collecting all your friends, and then all of a sudden you see your second degree ties. And then sometimes you can see how those second degree ties actually have jobs and positions that would be helpful. And so that's what happened. Searching for an agent, this lady pops up.
Yeah.
And so Geoff is
as a connection
to an agent. And so then Geoff reaches out and gets in it. Like the lady's like, sure, happy to help. She reaches out to her friend, and her friend responds, send it over. And within half an hour, you had an agent.
Yeah. Yeah. True story.
Which that is remarkable. It is not that easy usually.
Yeah.
And that I think is one of the best stories for the strength, the power of weak ties.
Yeah. I mean, this was I think, path-breaking paper when it came out, written by Mark Granovetter.
It was. It's a seminal article.
I think it's over 40 years old.
Mm-hmm.
But it's called The Strength of Weak Ties. I think it's one of the most cited papers in sociology. But basically, he said, in a pretty convincing study, people tend to get their jobs from people they barely know, their leads for where I should apply for a job, who's got a job opening.
Well, his research really showed that the benefit of weak ties is that by having some of these weak ties, like you have a network and there's probably a lot of redundancy in the network.
Which just means,
which means that
they
there are a
know
lot
what
of
I
people
know.
who know the
Yeah.
same people and know the same information and know the same job opportunities in this particular example. And so in order for you to have new opportunities, you have to find a way out of your core network.
Yep.
And a weak tie is a way to bridge into new networks with, and again, those networks have redundancy and similar information and know of similar opportunities, but that's in their group.
Yep.
And so you have to bridge over into that group to be able to tap those opportunities. And that research has been followed up. And I was just looking, there's been a recent Harvard, MIT, Stanford, LinkedIn study that they studied 20 million users over 5 years and found 600,000 jobs created through weak ties.
Yeah.
And
it more than strong ties.
yeah, right. And that the takeaway is, you need about 10 mutual acquaintances to really impact your job search.
Yeah. Tell me what you mean by that. Mutual acquaintances?
Like those weak ties. People, you need about 10 weak ties to really impact.
Oh, at least 10.
Yeah. But it says 10 is pretty much, you're pretty good at 10.
For people who you tangentially know,
Yeah.
but they have different networks. That was the insight of the paper and this follow-on study that you mentioned, which sounds much more recent, is that we mistakenly think that the people closest to us are best positioned to help us, and that isn't always the case.
They are probably the people who want to help you the most.
Yes.
But that doesn't mean that they have the best information to be helpful.
Yes. Because a lot of times they have the same information you have.
Right.
And so if you're trying to, it's the example we've been using, get a job, well, you would have already gotten a job based on what you know. So when you ask your best friend who knows similar to what you know, that's not adding anything for you.
Right.
I wasn't able to tap into agents in Manhattan until I did the favor for somebody who was in that network.
Right. And you did that, just for the record, without knowing that was going to happen in the future.
It was invisible.
Right.
Yeah, I offered to help before we were connected and before I was actually looking for an agent. Yeah. Yeah. But that's kind of that first big finding. The story I was thinking you were going to tell, a similar example. I don't know if I've told the story before, but when my dad was first diagnosed with Alzheimer's, consistent with the research, you want to go big. You want to activate a wide array of support, not just the people closest to you. We've talked about this before. Even though the tendency is to want to
keep it very private, because health is a very private matter. And I do think initially that was your family's reaction, is to try to keep it internally.
But that's not consistent with the research.
Right.
And so we started opening up more, talking more about it. And where it was relevant in some of the classes we taught, I would mention things that were happening. And so I was teaching in West Texas at a group of nurses. And I happened to mention something about the Alzheimer's. And at the end, one of the nurses came up to me and said, "Hey, sorry your dad has Alzheimer's. So does my dad. Did you say your dad was a veteran?" I said, "Yes." And that he was disabled. And I said, "Yes, from an underlying condition that he had from Vietnam." And she said, "Well, did you know that the government will pay him and pay your mom to take care of your dad, since he would otherwise be in a memory care, but he's at home?" And no, I had no idea. And she said, "Here, give me your phone number. Here's a link." And she sent me 2 links. And she was right. And that ended up activating enough money for my mom to be able to take care of my dad at home for a few years, which it was somebody I barely knew, probably did one of the biggest things for us. Mm-hmm. I mean, at the time she did the favor for me, I didn't even know her last name. I didn't have her phone in my contacts. I didn't have any of her contact information. She was just somebody in a class. And yet she gave us the information we needed. And it was probably one of the top 5 most important things in that multi-year journey we went through with my dad.
Right. And that gets to this idea of, the research has been more focused on jobs, but at least the stuff that we've talked about. But really, it's being able to get diverse information. And that example with the VA, that's noteworthy because it's not like we hadn't been communicating with the VA.
Yeah.
It's that the VA is such a big monster of an organization that people even inside it don't know what the other parts have to offer.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why we're talking about this. You put it to in a managerial context, for certain things you need in your teams, you're going to need contacts that are not just bringing you more of the same. Mm-hmm. A lot of times, as we've talked about before, there's a great subconscious pull to hire similar others. And over time, your organization or your team can have a lot of the same kinds of people in it. And that's an opportunity lost for some of this diversity, to bring diversity of experience, diversity of knowledge, which tends to increase creativity and the ability to solve difficult problems.
Well, and I think it also touches on what we talked about with Adam Willman. Basically, this idea that there's a tendency, even in organizations, like we often only live within our container. And so we tend to identify with our department more than the organization. And so we tend as managers to really think about only our people and our relationship with our people. But there's the relationships across the organization with other managers. There's a relationship up with the people who are above you. And we see many times from the network analysis that I run that managers don't really do a whole lot of those relationships. But even those are going to have redundancy. And really, for information and diversity of thinking, you really need to expand out past the organization to people who, and that was what Adam was talking about in his podcast. One of the things that he does for managers is he helps facilitate some connections to people in other organizations, but in similar positions.
Yeah.
And so it's amazing how our identity can be so constraining to information. That's why somebody who's in an office on another floor might as well be in another country. Like, we are very constrained by structure. We're very constrained by identity. And so these weak ties, we have to remember to actually break out and not just rely on our core.
Yeah. 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 Definitely. It's important and counterintuitive.
Yeah. It's not only counterintuitive, it's counter to normal behavior.
Yeah. Of wanting to, where's my core group? I solved the problem with my 3 amigos, or, we're good at fixing this ourselves.
Or our identity is we fix the stuff ourselves.
Right.
And so, then you definitely aren't going out of your own social network. So I think that's an important thing for people to think through, with anything that's a big decision that has weight, either financial or critical in some other way, which isn't always financial. You should seek out other opinions. The opinions you're going to seek out first are immediately in your vicinity. And you need to consciously make an effort to think beyond that immediate vicinity and beyond the immediate organization and try to get some information elsewhere.
Yep.
And it's really hard, not just because we're not built to think about that, but also because, I had mentioned with Geoff's example, that there's a little bit of sense of well, I should maintain privacy. Like there's a little bit of feeling like, am I violating a social norm by sharing this information that I need something or that we're thinking about something if I go and share it with somebody who's outside the group?
Yeah.
And I mean, obviously, if it's trade secrets, don't do it. But short of trade secrets, you're probably better off actually seeking that information.
Yeah.
And dipping your toe into other networks.
Yeah.
Hello, musers. Now it's time for commercial break.
You want to do a strategic plan, right? Well, you want to have a strategy. What's a strategy? Something only you can do, can't be copied, and it brings you a sustainable advantage. Most strategic plans are to-do lists, not actually strategic. We can fix that. We've been doing it now for years. If you want a strategic plan that's truly strategic, call us. OnDemandLeadership.com. OnDemandLeadership.com. We'll put the strategy in a strategic plan.
The third reason that we want to talk about this is because of its link to as like an anti-loneliness.
Yeah.
We're interested in it in terms of loneliness because we see it in surprising places.
See what?
Loneliness. And the people we are sometimes coaching, they're in organizations that people would predominantly say are family.
Yep,
They use terms about that. It's small towns. It's, where you would think that because it's small, people would know each other and have strong connections. And what we see is that sometimes they do have strong connections. They have some of the people, they may have multi-generations being in a particular town. So they definitely have the strong connections, but that's not enough. And that's what the research shows, is that it's not enough just having strong connections. To some degree, I think if you're relying only on your strongest connections, you're a little bit fragile.
So you're saying that in some of the places that we work, where there's a lot of multi-generational ties, some of the rural places that we work, that somebody has a lot of strong connections, but they're still lonely. Mm-hmm. And what's the research link on that?
I think there's two different groups. There's people who have the strong ties and they're lonely, and and they could benefit from weak ties. And there's the set of people who have come in from the outside, which is very hard to do. And the weak ties are a way to community build. And so both groups are getting hit to some degree. I think the reason why the people who've been there for generations, I find them a little bit more surprising because they are embedded in this network and their cousins work down the hallway and whatever. But when you are surrounded by strong ties, I think you put less effort into weak ties because you're used to relying on the strong ties. But the fact is that you're working in an organization, even though your cousin works down the hallway, you don't see each other. And so...
Very interesting. So you're saying in an organization, let's say there's 100 people in the organization and it's a small town. And so I'm tight with 7 of them, maybe blood with 5 of them. But in my average day, I don't see them that much or at all. I can still be lonely. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. And you think about some of the positions, the doctors who are just one patient after another. And you would think that was weak ties, right? They're seeing a bunch of people that they don't necessarily know, but they're not getting any. They're only giving in the interaction. There's nothing that's coming back.
Yeah.
And so you wind up coming out of there very depleted and lonely.
Yeah, it's interesting. We gather physicians a lot, and not most, but a lot of what they want to do when they're together is just talk with each other, because they seldom get a chance to do that. And so that makes sense to me, that you can be surrounded by people but not be getting,
and surrounded by people who actually you have some pretty strong ties to,
doctors to other doctors,
or within the organization, just people that
you're
don't
not
see.
seeing them. Yeah,
Right.
so you're not activating it. There's been some research. I forget the woman who led it, but basically she determined that, like, the checkout clerk at the grocery store, the barista, like we talked about at the beginning, the person at the dry cleaner, these people who you kind of know and you may not even know their name, and they may take a while before they learn your name, but them recognizing you and you recognize them. That's
the community building.
Yeah, is actually has a huge impact on people's well-being. That you don't feel, as crazy as it sounds, you don't feel isolated if the person at Starbucks says, "Hey, what's up? Good to see you again." And they don't know your name, but they knew you were here a couple days ago.
Right.
And it's been a long time ago, but Budweiser did a commercial. It was a little ditty, a little song. And it was just a guy walking down the street in Manhattan somewhere. And he's like, "And there's Mr. Chen. He sells me my bodega bread," or whatever. And he's like, "Yeah, Mr. Chen." And then there's Miss Salazar. She's sweeping her walk. And he, goes like that. And
he's doing some finger guns here.
Yeah. Yeah. He's just going down the street. "Hey, Miss Salazar. Hey, Mr. Chen." And high five with a little kid. And it's not strong ties. These are just people he knows in the neighborhood. But that's the idea of.
Yeah, it erodes that feeling of social isolation.
Yeah. That I'm a part of something. It sounds goofy, but the literature is bearing it out. That's why we're talking about this kind of third point of the weak ties, is that it helps you feel more connected into your place in the world.
Well, it helps you feel like you've been seen.
Yeah.
And like you need both of those things to feel seen and to feel like you belong.
Yeah. And you mentioned that, loneliness can happen anywhere. And it happens in some weird ways, like we talked about with the physicians who may not have the ability to interact in a way that has reciprocity a whole lot. And then that can lead to loneliness. But it also happens in huge organizations. Mm. Like there's one place I worked in a huge town, decent sized company. And in a particular department, virtually all of the managers changed over. And the only manager left, the old one, like all her peer group went away.
Right.
And she stuck it out for maybe 8 months, but she was lonely. And the new people came in and it was all the new, right?
And they're navigating towards each other because they're more likely to be approximately the same age and circumstance and level of experience. And so you start piling up similarity. And so they're starting to like form together. And she's there.
Yep. And she got lonely.
Yeah.
And I told her point blank, "You're lonely. Stop projecting on these people. Go make friends. Go try to go to lunch with them." All these things to try to make connections. And it never ended up being enough. She ended up getting a new job. And it was mostly because of the loneliness driving us.
Yeah, I don't know in her particular case, because a good friend of mine is going through the same thing. You know her. Where it's like a difference, like a change in guard in terms of now I'm like the one older person in this organization.
Yeah.
But I also think that if the visibility feels hostile, then being seen isn't, it's got to be both the sense of visibility and connection. Because as soon as it feels hostile, then all you want to do is like protect yourself from it. And that may be what happened with that lady, is that even with like the efforts to try to forge the connections, it still felt like a layer. Like talking to my friend, she talks about how like they have these private groups, even, on the technology, whatever platform, Teams or whatever, where like there are conversations going that she's not included in, and yet she like picks up enough to know that that's happening, and it feels very intentionally excluding.
Sure. Yeah.
And it winds up being hostile. And so then it's not, you're not overcoming it with weak ties. The weak ties have to basically be able to accomplish both things.
Yeah. 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 I mean, the purpose of this discussion is so people recognize, as you said, the strong core group of people you're closest to is necessary, but not sufficient for a good life. That we tend to get some of our best novel opportunities, whether that's getting a job or getting new information or being exposed to something we wouldn't otherwise, by weak ties. We get better diversity of thought and access into different places. And we get a more solid feeling of social connection.
That reduces the sense of social isolation.
Yeah. And loneliness.
And yeah.
Yeah. And these are three big reasons to
pay attention to your weak ties, which you probably aren't paying attention to right now.
Yeah. To talk to the barista for 3 seconds, to try to learn his or her name so that next week you can use that name.
Yeah. You don't have to invite them to dinner.
Nope. Small things. Name. Hello. What's new?
Just even
You got a new tattoo?
Just even the like flare recognition that comes into your eyes.
Yeah. 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 Like that's something I make a joke about, the tattoo, but I try to spot new tattoos on people I know because they always want to talk about it.
But that's because tattoos are identity markers. So actually it's very few people who are getting a frivolous tattoo. Most people, that tattoo means something significant.
Yeah. Small thing. But again, you don't have to be a superman or woman and remember every name and notice every new tattoo or whatever.
No, just you can recognize somebody with your eyes.
Yeah. There's a line of research. It's been years ago and never really went too far. It had a term, but it was basically the people who when they enter a situation, it doesn't change the conversation. So usually every time somebody enters the conversation, like we're sitting here and all of a sudden my mom shows up, the conversation changes a little bit. Mm-hmm. That's normal. But there are certain categories of people at the time of this research. The two that I remember the most were janitors and taxi drivers, where they enter and it doesn't change the conversation. And so they started doing studies of these people who were there. You can see them, but it doesn't impact the conversation.
And that's another way of saying that they're invisible.
Which is our reminder. I know it sounds weird, but I always remembered that research and I tried to talk to janitors and taxi drivers who happen to be, like everybody else,
pretty interesting.
Right. Have families, have backstories.
Yeah, I mean, we've had Uber drivers who were pretty well-known comedians and
crazy.
We've had like really interesting people that we've encountered. So yeah, it's true.
Yeah. Yeah. And we'll
never see them again because it's
Uber.
random.
Yeah. Which is a little bit different from the kind of weak ties where you get to know them. But it's a reminder in your orbit from a weak tie perspective, when you can, go out of your way, to learn their name or to get to know just a tiny bit about them. because not only is it nice,
It's nice for you emotionally, but it also has an impact on them. Can you
Sure.
imagine being a taxi driver and all these people are coming through? It's the doctor, right? It's the doctor with all the patients. All these people are coming through the taxi and everybody doesn't see you.
Yep.
Like, that's terrible.
Yeah. Talk to your doctor.
Yeah.
Ask your doctor how she's doing.
Yeah, it's funny, and do that with your taxi driver. But it's funny with the doctor because it's like, I've got one doctor I absolutely love. Like, this lady would totally be my friend, and I think she really feels that way about me. But it's like, how do you even get that across the line? Yeah, like maybe it will happen eventually. It did with dry cleaners, so maybe it will happen eventually. But like every time I see her, I'm like, I just want to do lunch with you. I like you so much.
Yeah. But you never ask her.
No, I never ask her.
Yeah.
Because it feels weird too, because she's my doctor.
Sure. Yeah. And that's the dilemma.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. Very interesting. What else you want to talk about?
That's it.
Okay. There you go.
Thank you for joining us today on Management Muse.
See you next time.
See you next time. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today on Management Muse. We are a podcast / YouTube channel that we hope is entertaining and educational. If you are on YouTube, we would appreciate you subscribing and maybe leaving a comment and a like. If you are on any of the podcasts listening to this, we would appreciate stars, following, comments, all the good stuff. We want to say thank you to Christina, Sarah, and Rebecca, and then, of course, everybody at Design at Work. And then just as a last-minute reminder, we also want to mention that we are management and communication professionals working in the field, but also have degrees that back us in science. All that being said, we are talking in generalities on this podcast. We do not actually know your particular situation. So proceed with common sense and maybe a little bit of experimentation on your end. And we hope that you make the world a more beautiful place by making work a more enjoyable place. See you next time on Management Muse.